everyone, welcome to our bonus episode for this week. We're talking about Australia.
Good day.
What the hell has Australia got to do with Coronation Street, Michael?
Plenty.
More than you think.
I was hoping at the beginning of the episode you could say I'm Gemma and I'd be able to say I'm Bruce, but I wouldn't lower myself to such stereotypes. No. I'm not going to do that at all. Coronation Street has got lots to do with Australia, Gemma. And we've kind of decided to do this because Neighbours is sadly no longer with us. The long running Down Under soap came to its end last week, and we watched the final episodes of Neighbours. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And we thought, in a bit of a tribute, we'd see what we could scrabble together and come up with to talk about Coronation Street's links with Australia, which is more than you'd think, but still not loads. But we'll see how this goes. How do you want to get this started, Gemma? Should we just kind of talk? I was trying to find out like what history Coronation Street has even had on Australian TV. And as far as I could tell, and this is quite a good bit of trivia. This is just going to be full of little bits of trivia, really.
What are your sources for this?
The internet.
Okay. Yeah, but you also
probably Coripedia and books and things. Yes.
What book? You need to write all this down. You haven't done this.
I got some of it from Carrie Kershaw's biography. I got some of it from Pat Phoenix's biography. I got some from just random places on the internet. It's fine. People know that I usually get my sources. Anyway, so Australia was the first country to buy Coronation Street. That's pretty cool.
It is pretty
trivia
cool.
fact, isn't it? Because when you think about Coronation Street's foreign viewers these days, it's the Canadians that often come to the forefront of your mind. But no, Coronation Street was first bought by Australia in 1963, so only a couple of years into its run, and it was shown in Melbourne then for a bit, and then Sydney, Melbourne. And then Sydney in the following year in 1964. So it was all, regional programming and everything. And Australia's a big place. They probably can't.
It is quite big.
Rather large country, that is. But within 7 months, Corrie was in the top 10 programmes on Australia, which is both crazy and also really cool. And not surprising, because it is actually awesome. And by 1966, it was even more popular in Australia, kind of viewership-wise, than it was in the UK. So they really took it to heart in those first years, trying to get a taste of the old country, I guess, and seeing how things were back in Pommyland here. But sadly, the popularity of Coronation Street didn't stay in Australia for too long. In 1976, after a load of scheduling changes, and this is the kind of thing that often sees programmes get dropped, isn't it? They move them around in the schedules and they say, oh, nobody wants to watch it anymore.
Especially back in those days when you couldn't record anything.
Yeah, exactly. So in 1976 it was dropped, but then it was back on the air again in 1979, where they kind of went back to 1976 and showed Elsie Tanner's return to the streets. Remember, she went off for a little bit and then she came back again later. And I think it was the same episode that they used for the Granada Plus starting off point in the late 90s as well. So that was obviously seen as a bit of a new beginning for Coronation Street for the schedulers there. Well, it stayed on the some stations on Australia throughout the 80s, and then in 1994 it returned to the 9 network where it was broadcast for a year or so. Channel 9 in Perth, after this, started airing it daily in 2005. Because they wanted, from what I could see, they wanted more people to watch their daily news show. So they thought if they had a big programme like Coronation Street coming before it, they'd be driving more people towards the news.
No, start a war.
What?
If you want to boost ratings for the news, start a war or something.
Yeah, it's probably easier to put a programme on before it. But anyway, they tried that, didn't really work. And after a couple of months, they dropped Corrie completely.
Oh,
currently, I believe, and I haven't actually asked any Australian people to check this out, speaking of my sources, it now airs on Foxtel's BBC UTTV service, where it airs every weeknight, 7:30, and they're about a week behind the UK in their airings.
It's going to be even... Well, how can it air every night at 7:30?
No questions. Maybe it's on twice on 2 nights, for the half-an-hour episodes. I don't know. This is just what I found. But please do write in and correct me if I'm wrong, which is very likely.
That is an interesting point, though, about how some people talk about or wonder why Coronation Street, when it has its 2 episodes mashed into one like we do now in the UK, so we have 3-hour-long episodes now. Why do they have separate writers? Why do they have different production codes? It's because they get bought by other countries where they don't necessarily want to put on Coronation Street for an hour.
Yeah, exactly. So they can put them into nice half-hour bite-sized chunks.
I mean, it makes sense.
I think maybe they do in Australia. I think the whole of this episode's going to be things of me possibly being wrong. So do write in your numerous corrections afterwards, and I'll admit them in next week's episode. So. There have been a few Australian characters in Coronation Street over the years, haven't they? And I think the first kind of major-ish character, although he was only in a few handful of episodes, I suppose, was Ted Ashley back in 1964, and he was played by Gerald Wells. Gemma, can you tell our listeners a little bit about this one? Because I think this is a character that not many people will know too much about.
Well, he emigrated to Australia after the First World War, World War One, as we called it. And then he came back to Coronation Street in March 1964 after that. And Martha Longhurst remembered him.
Yeah, they'd been to school together, hadn't they? There's a really funny episode, which is this guy coming back to Coronation Street, and Martha Longhurst is like, "Oh, I went to school with you. Do you remember that?" She
fancied him.
Yes, she does.
And she buys a tin of best salmon from the corner shop and invites him for tea. And Mina and Innie are... Hang on a minute. Minnie and Ina are really like, they know something's up because why is she buying best salmon and all this stuff? So they get really intrigued and they get invited along. And they all go for tea together at Martha's house. And he has no idea who particularly Martha is, does he?
No, it's funny. He's like got vague memories.
Saying, I remember you did that, and then one of them will be like, no, it wasn't her, it was me.
Yeah, he's remembering pranks that some of them did, and they were like, no, that wasn't me. And there's a really funny bit at the end of one scene where he says, oh yeah, I do remember you. You were always really, really meek-mannered and quiet and mousy and never said boo to a goose. And then the scene ends with Ina saying, no, that was me.
That was great. And she like smiles, doesn't she? Like.
I've had a bit of a personality change in the intervening 50-odd years.
I like the way she seemed really proud of herself. Like, yep, I've it's me, the new and improved.
I've blossomed since then, Ina Sharples. So that was a really funny scene.
So Ted wants to go to London to visit his sister, and he suggests Martha comes, and so she takes out all of her savings and gets ready to go, and he's like, oh, I was only being polite, I didn't really expect you to come with me.
But she's really holding a torch for him, isn't she? She's really a bit besotted with him.
Ina gets into a conversation with Ted and tricks him into saying something that she could pretend to construe as a proposal. So she's like...
Yeah, she says, oh, what? Tell me about your home, or what's it like back in home? And he says to her, oh, you'd really like the place. And Ina kind of pretends to take that to mean, oh, you're inviting me to marry you. Obviously, she doesn't think that, but she's trying to make him propose to her so she can make Martha think that he's a bit of a player. Yeah,
obviously she turns him down.
Yes.
But Martha's still not put off, and she follows Ted to London, but she comes back after a week because he's not interested at all, and he didn't really want her to come, and she didn't get it, and it was all a bit tragic. But I will say, if you don't intend to do something with somebody, don't invite them or say you're going to do it. It's just rude.
Yeah.
Just don't. There's no need to be polite about things.
Yeah, and Martha Longhurst never really had many stories of her own, did she? She was very much a hanger-on for those few short years that she was in Corrie at the beginning of the 60s. But this is a nice little couple of week mini story for her that just kind of and it was cool to harken back to the days of their youth. I kind of imagine little Ina, Minnie and Martha going to school together. It was quite cool. But yeah, Ted Ashley was, I believe, Corrie's first Australian character. But that wasn't the end of Australia in Coronation Street in the 60s, because there was also David Barlow, Ken's brother. Obviously not Australian himself, but he did move off to Australia.
Did all of this get put in because they knew that Australians were into Coronation Street, I wonder?
I don't know. That's a really good point, actually.
Because if...
so when was Ted? Was it 1964? Yeah. So
1966 is when it hit peak, didn't it? Because everybody loved it more there than they did here.
Yeah, Ted coming into Coronation Street the previous year really did coincide with I think it was Sydney, I said, picking up the programme. So it could have actually been put in to try and entice Australian viewers to watch.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, the end of the 1960s, David Barlow and his wife Irma move off to Australia because he's a bit of a football player, and but he gets
a bit of a football player, he's a football.
Corrie's first professional football player. He is the James Bailey of the 60s, only slightly more interesting.
And there's quite a lot of like regional teams that aren't Weatherfield. What's it called?
He was playing in Weatherfield Athletic.
What is it?
It's Weatherfield County is what it's called these days. So he ended up getting injured in 1965. He tore a ligament in his left knee during a match, and he was told, "You'll never play again." So he ended up having to leave the club, and that's when he fell for Irma Ogden, and he ended up working in the corner shop with her. But he kind of got the footballing bug again after a couple of years, and started managing the local women's team, Weatherfield Hotspurs. So,
if only he'd kept at it, because that pays off eventually.
Well, there might be some lionesses that were made.
Yeah, maybe some lionesses, grandmas or mums watched this and thought, one day my children or grandchildren will be.
I think we can definitely credit David Barlow for England's win in the Euros.
He was a pioneer of women's football.
He totally was. But he ended up. This kind of led him into getting back into football himself. He ended up.
He was like, "That's not how you do it." Let me show you.
In 1968, he played his first match since the accident, and then he decides to go back and play professionally again, which Irma is not happy with, because she's happy with him working there in the shop, and she doesn't want to hurt himself anymore, and she gets so livid when he hears that he's been offered a chance to play on an Australian team that she slaps him round the face. But then she sees a picture of what their house is going to look like over in Australia, and she changes her mind a little bit because it looks lovely.
Well, she becomes Corrie's first wag.
She was a proper wag, wasn't she? You're right.
She's like the first wag on telly, probably. Yes. And she kind of liked the glam. She wasn't a glam girl particularly. She's very down to earth.
Yeah, she wasn't Ogden after all.
She did like the trappings of luxury, because who wouldn't? And I think she took to it like a duck to water, but it was never her thing.
No.
And I really like that. I don't know whether they set out to make Irma kind of unbothered by this, but she certainly, her status and her income was considerably more than most people.
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
And it never kind of went to her head, which I like. Well, in the episodes I saw, maybe that's not correct.
Yeah.
But.
Well, here to put a drain on her income year was Irma finding out she was going to have a little baby Barlow in the tummy. So she says, "Oh, I'm going to go over to Australia anyway. I'm going to give birth to my baby there," which Hilda, Irma's mum, tries to stop her doing by sending the drayman, Vince Boyle, around to see her and scare her with horror stories about what Australia is like. I don't know what this was, but...
Did this put the Aussies off, do you reckon? They were like, well, screw you then.
We're not just giant spiders and man-eating kangaroos. I don't know what it was that Vince said to Irma, but whatever it was, it didn't work. That would all it'd take for you, wouldn't it? No countries where giant spiders can come and bite you in the bum on the toilet, or the dunny, as they call it over there. Anyway, it didn't work. Barlow's just end up rowing on their last day in the UK. So David says, "Look, you're going to love it when you get there, love," and they head off to Adelaide in 1968. However, tragedy strikes, doesn't it, a couple of years later. Irma already has not been too happy with life in Australia. She comes back to Weatherfield once or twice over the following year or two, and she's telling Elsie she hates it there. Elsie says, no, go back, it's fine, it's Australia, love, it's wonderful. But she was right to be concerned about Australia, because not only do they have giant spiders in Down Under, they also have car crashes.
I can't believe
we don't
it.
have that kind of thing there.
Don't allow it.
No. April 1970, Irma and David are in a car crash along with their poor baby Darren.
I can't believe that.
David.
Baby Darren is just, every time I hear Baby Darren, it makes me laugh, because Darren to me is a man's name. And the idea of a baby being called Darren is just so funny.
We'll have to ask Darren Little whether he was ever a baby, won't we?
I don't think that they just kind of hatch, don't they?
Come out as men. Now, this was a brilliant episode, wasn't it? When the Ogdens and the Barlows find out about the car crash.
Yeah,
it's like a really
just waiting.
somber episode because, you know, these days, if you want to talk to somebody on Australia, you just get on your Zoom or whatever, do a connection with them and it's fine. But back in them, it was like very expensive to call down there.
Well,
you had to book a call, the time difference. Well, still time differences now.
They had to like book the satellite dishes so that they could bounce the signal all the way from Australia, and it would get routed all the different ways. And there's a bit where Emily Bishop's talking about, it's going to be routed through London up to Manchester, like all these different places. And they were just sitting around and they had to wait till like 8 o'clock, didn't they, to get this phone call to find out what had happened. It's
a real kind of edge of your seat, it's really kind of tense. Somber, tense episode as they're waiting for the phone call.
Well, because it's the Ogdens and the Barlows. So
they're in the Barlows' house, aren't they?
You've got Ken Barlow, you've got Valerie Barlow, his wife, you've got Stan and Hilda. And they're all they know that there was a car crash, and they know that the baby was in the car, and they're waiting to hear who's survived and who hasn't. And Stan, there's a bit where they talk to the hospital, and the hospital tells them stuff, and then Stan saying, "What's the difference between what's critically injured mean? What does that mean?"
Yeah, what's the difference between critically and fatally?
Yeah, and Ken's like trying to explain it, but he's like distracted. And
this is before they find out what's
they don't know what's happened.
Yeah, there's also a bit earlier on in the episode where Hilda first gets the news, and she was just like, "I don't want to know, and she's like breaking.
Don't tell me.
They were going to go off. Know the news. Yeah.
They were going to go to the cinema, weren't they? Stan and Hilda, and she was really excited. And then she gets this news, and they sit and they wait and they wait and they wait.
Doesn't somebody else phone up first?
Yeah, Ken's like, "I don't want to talk to you."
Yeah, and then at the end of the episode, it all comes through.
Well, he listens to the phone call, and then he goes, "Thank you very much," and then Stan has to go, and it was really well acted because they both were kind of like, Ken was in charge and Stan was just like this big like man child, wasn't he, like very meek and dejected and just kind of like he was just relying on Ken for everything, and he's not the sort of man who would ever defer to anybody. I don't think.
He also knows that he has to hold it all together for Hilda as well, and he does a very good job of that. I think.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, so they find out in that phone call that David Barlow has been killed, and Darren, the baby, is in a critical condition, and then over the following episode, Irma's fine. She's all right.
In case you're worried.
Hilda's like, I need to go over there. I need to get over to Australia to go and to be with Irma and Darren. So she ends up borrowing £600 from Dave Smith, who's the local bookie, and she goes over to Australia. Irma's kind of, they obviously don't show any Australian scenes or anything, but she brings Irma back. She's blaming herself because the two of them are rowing when the crash happens, and this is how Irma comes back to Coronation Street, which is great. She didn't stay there for very long. She was only in it for a year or two after this, wasn't she? Before Sandra Gough did her disappearing act.
I really loved Irma.
Yeah, so not a happy story, but a really, really great set of episodes actually. And Corrie had wanted to bring the whole family back, but Alan Rothwell, who played David Barlow and is still alive and kicking today, might I add, he was too busy with theatre work, so they just brought Sandra Gough back and didn't even cast the baby. How rude.
They went to Alan Rothwell, "Well, if you're not coming back, we're going to kill your baby. What do you think about that?" He's like, "Go ahead and do it."
So another Australian character that they had in Coronation Street was in the 80s. Now this was Ian Latimer, who was played by Michael Loney, and he was Bert Tilsley's nephew from Perth. So this is Gail's first husband's father, wasn't it, Bert? Yeah. So and then Ian Latimer was the cousin, and he was involved in a bit of a scandalous story in the mid to late 80s.
So whose cousin is he?
No, did I say cousin?
Yeah.
Probably someone's cousin. Would it be Brian's cousin?
Who's Bert Tilsley?
Bert Tilsley is Brian's dad.
Oh, so it is his cousin. It's Ian Latimer and Brian
we were cousins.
Tilsley, who is Nick's dad.
Yes. Just a little bit of family tree for you, anyone who don't know. It's a relation to Gail by marriage. Yeah. One of her marriages.
First one.
How many relations by marriage do you think that Gail has got? I hope she doesn't have to send them all a Christmas card.
Well, you know how they say, like, everybody's related to Genghis Khan?
Yeah.
And in Asia, and everyone is related to Charlemagne in Europe. I think everyone in Weatherfield's related to Gail in some manner.
Well, not just Weatherfield. She's spread her roots to Australia now, hasn't she?
Yeah.
Anyway, so he pops over to Weatherfield.
And Canada through Audrey.
Yeah, exactly. In 1986, and he is immediately flirty with Gail.
Yeah.
Brian doesn't really notice to begin with because he's just impressed by how amazing Australia sounds.
So futuristic.
Yes. Gail ends up getting quite close to Ian when she shows him around Weatherfield, and then when he puts the idea to her that she and Brian moved to Australia, she's like, yes, please.
Sounds brilliant.
Yeah, we'll go to Australia.
If everyone's charming like this there.
It's quite interesting how many characters have kind of emigrated down there. Like, when I was looking through characters that we could talk about today, I was thinking, didn't Martin Platt go to Australia? But he was actually New Zealand. So it's not an uncommon thing for Coronation Street Weatherfield residents to go down there. But anyway, I digress. So Brian gets called out on this long distance job because he was a mechanic back in the day. So Gail ends up...
Yes, that was weird. He spent a lot of time off, didn't he? Doing
But he was also on... Didn't he work on the oil rigs? Didn't he work in Saudi Arabia? Or
That's
Qatar.
Right, yeah.
He was there for a bit. And I can't remember whether this was then. But in any case, Gail ends up getting a bit pally-pally with Ian, going out to dinner with him and stuff. And he tells her about how he was jilted by his fiancée, and then he makes a pass at Gail. Oh. Before long... They've spent the night together.
Oh dear.
Oh, Gail, Miss High and Mighty.
She's such a goer.
She's a proper goer back in the 1980s.
Gail the goer.
And I don't know whether Martin knew about that when he was having his little flings with the nurses at the hospital, but I'd have totally thrown that in her face. So, not the only one, Gail.
Yeah, you're not the only one who can get your end away.
You might think the butter doesn't melt in her mouth these days.
No,
but yeah.
She acts like it.
She totally does. So she ends up like skiving off work to see Ian. Audrey suspects that something's going on, and Gail's like, "Yeah, so what? Brian's had loads of bits on the side. So why can't I have a little piece?
Well, it's the 80s
of Aussie action.
What's the point of being a woman in the 80s if you can't have a bit of action?
Exactly. This is women's live.
Yeah.
Right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Brian ends up coming back, and Gail gets a bit disappointed by Ian, who refuses to carry on the affair with her. She ends up chasing him to the airport, breaks down in tears, saying, please don't go back to Australia. And he's like, sorry, Gail. She is a little bit, wasn't she? He ends up hopping on a plane, and that's it for him. Gail says, you know what, Brian, I don't want to emigrate to Australia anymore. See, I'd have thought she might have said, no, let's carry on doing it. Australia, I'm sure that I'll be able to resume this affair with him. But no, she's too hurt by Ian's rejection, so she ends up staying in Weatherfield. But she then gets pregnant.
Uh-oh.
And is this a common theme with Australia and women getting pregnant in Coronation Street? So there's a bit of a who's the daddy story that goes on here. Audrey writes to Ian because she suspects that he might actually be the father.
And just to reiterate, this baby is Nick.
This baby is Nick, yes. No, it's not. It's Sarah Louise.
Is it?
Yeah. Nick's...
Oh, okay. Nick's already been born.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's Sarah Louise. Okay.
Yeah. So Ian comes back to Weatherfield
and could have been Australian.
Proposes to Gail. I know, but she turns him down. By this point, though, Brian's found out about Gail and Ian, and he started divorce proceedings against her. So I can't remember why she decided not to just go with him instead.
There's no way to tell whether the baby whose child the baby
So
is.
yeah, nobody knew whose baby it was. It's only really
recently that they've even managed to do non-harmful in utero tests for paternity for children. It's only very, very recent.
Now the baby ends up coming when Brian and Ian get into a fight. Ian comes round their house to say goodbye. I'm going back off to Australia again. They get into a bit of a punch up. Gail goes into labour at 35 weeks, so a little bit early.
Dramatic.
Oh no, totally dramatic. Audrey says to Ian, look, you probably want to hang around because we can find out now whether you're the dad. So they have blood tests and everything. Sadly for Ian, or maybe it's a relief
lucky
for Ian
escape.
to be any lucky escape to be tied down to Gail Platt. Oh, what was she then? Tilsley. It shows that he can't be the father. So he bogs off back to Australia, and that's the last we hear of him.
Can I just give Coronation Street writers and storyliners a little idea here for a stupid
Go for
twist?
it. I'm sure they
blood tests were wrong. Sarah Louise has an Australian father. I heard Guy Pearce is free at the moment.
Yes, good
idea.
idea.
Come back and be her dad. There's
totally
lots of out-of-work Australian soap actors available to become Sarah Louise's dad.
Oh, but poor Michael Loney. He's probably just sitting waiting by the phone call.
Any minute now they're going to realise it could have been a mix-up at the hospital. They've done it once, they can do it again.
They could totally do that, couldn't they? That Weatherfield General, I don't trust them with anything to do with baby's parents, especially late 80s, early 90s.
They were all over the place. I think they must have been drunk.
We had Brian and Ali, we had possibly fake Katie, who of course we're going to talk about later.
Fakey.
Next one, I've got Jules Robinson.
I think that's a brilliant idea. Do you not think that would be amazing? Oh, I'm just imagining it. It would be so great.
You go, listen
and
to
I
that,
tell you,
writers.
I want him to be a burly, like, outdoorsman, kind of like Crocodile Dundee. I'm sorry, I know it's a stereotype, but only because I want him to totally look down his nose at Adam and think he's a floppy little bookie, Polly Poo Pants or whatever he wants to call him. And
a pommy poo pants.
And then Adam spends his whole time like trying to be manly and do manly things, and everyone thinks he's an absolute loser and a weirdo.
There we go. There's one for you.
Don't you think that would be so much fun?
That
would give Adam and Sarah something interesting to do that isn't just Adam getting mad about people wanting him to do lawyering and Sarah wagging her finger at people in the factory.
I love it. Right, so Jules Robinson and Kerry Fletcher. These are a couple of characters that only appeared in 2 episodes back in the early 2000s, and we saw one of them on the DVDs, didn't we? Do you remember these ones?
Nope, I don't know who they are.
Well, I will tell you then. So Jules Robinson was played by Rebecca Ritters, who listeners might remember as having played Hannah Martin in Neighbours for 7 years. So I think this is the only ex-Neighbours cast that we've had come into Coronation Street. So far, yeah. She played her between 92 and 99. You
were saying, Michael, that you wanted more immigrant families in
I do love an Australian accent. So
we could have some people come from Australia and it could just be the survivors.
Exactly.
The Neighbours survivors.
So Jules showed up with Kerry, who was played by Amber Sainsbury, who was actually a New Zealand-born actress, but hey, we can't tell. And they're in Manchester.
That's not Australia true.
We've been talking about not being able to tell between American and Canadian accents on Confronts Hannah.
There are some people you can tell.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. Anyway, they're in Manchester for the 2002 Commonwealth Games, and Les invites them to stay. So they're basically just backpacking over here. And Les and Kirk invite them back to number 5, and they're just trying to impress them and flirt with them and stuff. And there's a funny scene that somebody put on Twitter the other day, which is Kirk sitting on the sofa with his top off with a dumbbell going, "Hey, look at me." And these girls are just like saying, "Oh, wow, you're so buff. How often do you go to the gym?" And he's like, 3 or 4 times a week. So they're basically just using them so they can have somewhere to stay when they're coming over for the games. And they're the ones that end up seeing Norris punching tickets there when he's told everybody that he's a medal bearer and he's working for the games. But they don't do too much. They're just there for fun, really.
It's a good link to the Commonwealth Games, which is on at the moment in Birmingham.
Yes, absolutely.
20 years later.
Now, speaking of kids being born in Australia and coming over here, we also had Simon Barlow, didn't we?
Right. Was he born in Australia?
No, he wasn't born in Australia, actually.
What are you talking
That's completely
about?
wrong. He was born over here, but he moved to Australia, so he could have come in with an Australian accent, because he lived there for 4 or 5 years, didn't he?
Yep. So he, Lucy Richards, who was Peter Barlow's bigamous wife, she had Simon, moved to Australia in 2003 after she discovered that Peter was also married to Shelley. And then she dies. Yeah, they're not very good at looking after people over in Australia.
No, they're really not, are they? I kind of feel a bit worried for Emma.
God. I mean, we're going to get to Ramsay Clegg in a minute, but he didn't even get to set foot in Australia before they killed him off.
Go on, you talk about Ramsay then, because I know we watched something recently. We both enjoyed
Ramsay Clegg, played by Andrew Sachs.
Legend.
Manuel in Fawlty Towers. And he was the illegitimate child of Eunice Cole, who was Norris Cole's mum. Yes. So he and Norris were brothers. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if they have the same dad. I can't remember.
No, I don't. No, because he was illegitimate and Norris wasn't.
I know, but that doesn't mean anything. That just means that they weren't married.
No, I can't remember. I think
that just means they weren't married at the time. Yeah, back in those days. In these days, no one cares. Loose morals all over the place. Kids popping out left, right, and centre. Right. So he was born in 1935, and she.
So he sends him off to Australia. In shame.
Well, it was. There were lots of children that got sent to Australia.
Yeah, that was the done thing back then,
horrible.
Wasn't it?
So he turns up to visit her in 1960, but she's too embarrassed, and she's ashamed of herself because of all this horrible internalised misogyny and people judging her and things, and she didn't want to face up to it, so she turns him away, and then she dies in the January following, and Norris always blames Ramsay for this because he thinks that he set her off. Yeah. And that's why she died.
Now, that wasn't in the show, of course. Norris wasn't a character back in 1960.
We don't know about this until 2009 when Ramsay Clegg turns up. Nobody knows this, but he has a brain tumour.
He knows that.
He knows he's got a brain tumour. He doesn't tell anybody else because he wants to make up with Norris before he dies. And Norris has got no intention whatsoever of putting the past behind him.
Yeah, he's been holding this grudge for like 50 years.
Yep, he's still completely mad, and Ramsay gets closer to Emily, and Emily obviously is very forgiving, apart from if you murder her husband. She tries to get Norris to agree to move in to a flat in Victoria Court together so they could sort of grow old together as brothers, and Norris is not having it. He's not interested. He hates this guy.
I really love the relationship between Ramsay and Emily because this is like, he was almost her last love, or swing. Could have been a last. Fling, I mean. Yeah. It was always a fling, wasn't it? I mean, Ernest dies. When did Ernest die? That was still the 70s, wasn't it?
Yeah, but he wasn't the last one, was he?
He wasn't. I mean, she had a few other guys after them, Arnold Swain, and then what was the vicar called? Bernard, I think. But none of them really went anywhere. And this is her last chance at happiness. So when Norris... It
wasn't overtly romantic, though, was it? It was like let's be companions. Yeah, this could be something more. But he couldn't bear to be around Norris when Norris wouldn't forgive him. And Emily was furious, really, because Norris not only ruined Ramsay's chance for happiness, but also hers, in a sense. Yeah. Emily was furious with Norris. Anyway, so Ramsay flies back to Australia, but he dies on the plane.
That's sad. That's the scene where he gets into the taxi and Emily's just like crying to see him go. It's sad.
I know. Norris is like, whatever, don't even care. But he goes to see his mother's grave, and he finds a touching message that Ramsay had left before he went. And he also gets the trunk of Ramsay's possessions sent to him. And it's so sad, there's like a boomerang there that when he was a kid he wanted to give to Norris, like 50 years before, and loads of letters that Ramsay had written to their mother, who refused to see him again and again, and it proved that Ramsay was in no way at fault for any of this, and he tried his best to be a good son and a good brother, and he'd been rejected by both Norris and his mum. I think this is... Ramsay Clegg's story is probably the most really tragic story. I'm trying to think of a more tragic story.
Well, this was a really good use in one of the episodes as well of in-universe music as well, wasn't it? The non-diegetic music, because... Or was it in... No, I can't remember, because they play Waltzing Matilda. I think it starts off with Emily maybe putting the record of Waltzing Matilda on.
Well, he left it as a joke, didn't he? He said, this is kind of funny, but I like it.
But then it's really tragic because it plays over the final scenes of the episode, and that includes Norris going to see his mum's grave, and it was just so sad, and he's there at his mum's grave, he sees that Ramsay's left a bunch of flowers and a note for her and everything, and it's just Norris realising what an arse he's been. And this was after he found out that Ramsay had died as well, so it was too late to make amends with his brother. It was so well done. Absolutely loved it.
And I liked it too, because they didn't try to sort of soft shoe it, or like make Norris, it was all a misunderstanding or something. No, Norris was just an arsehole. And he was a character that some people liked or liked to hate him, didn't they? So I think that...
He was always forgiven. But he was, definitely. They weren't shy about making him kind of nasty.
Villain. Yeah.
But we hear again about Ramsay in 2014 because Norris gets a telescope in the post from him after it had kind of been redirected around the world for many years, and I think that's what ties into the story of seeing Blanche's ghost on a tablet or something. I can't remember how it tied in, but anyway, so Ramsay was an absolutely great character. Less beloved from the Coronation Street fandom is Hannah fake Katie Gilmore, who was played by Hannah Ellis Ryan. And if you want an example of how 2018's Coronation Street wasn't the most popular of years among the viewing Coronation Street viewers, then you need to look no further than this. Jim Mcdonald is an absolute Corrie legend, isn't he? And when he was shipped off to jail in the early 2000s after being responsible for Jez Quigley's death, everyone always loved it when he made his appearances every couple of years. And he's a real kind of go off for a few years, come back, go off, come back. And it would always be a little treat when Jim Mcdonald returned to the programme. He hasn't been seen since this story. And I think it would be a shame if this was his final appearance, but it certainly really did a number on him. So basically, the story was that he's out of prison and everything by this point. But the last time we'd seen him before it, he was in prison, and Liz and Steve, wife and son, had kind of abandoned him there, basically, because he tried to trick them. So he comes back to Coronation Street in 2018, hell-bent on revenge. However, his plan is that he's going to con Liz into thinking that this Hannah, with an Australian accent, is actually their dead baby. Well, the baby that died in Coronation Street in the early 90s. Yeah. After a few days of after birth, wasn't she?
Yeah.
And like we said earlier, there was a bit of a mix up in the old Weatherfield General around this time. So Liz is led to believe that this is their daughter. It was mixed up, shipped off to Australia, and now she's come back. Whereas what has actually happened is that Hannah had written to Jim in prison under one of these befriend an inmate schemes. Yep. She'd got a bit besotted with him, and they concocted this plan together. So Liz at first refuses to believe that this Australian bird could possibly be their dead baby. But when she sees a birthmark on her, that's all the convincing she needs. And it turns out that Hannah has been applying this birthmark with makeup. But does the job.
Who would
Liz.
lie?
I know. So Hannah convinces Liz that, like Jim, she's suffering from this rare genetic disease that Jim's got. And she needs money to go to not to Australia, to America for treatment for it. So there's stories about Liz trying to get together money to pay what she apparently needs. Now, Jim, meanwhile, is really struggling with this con. He thought it was a good idea at first, but he just can't put his feelings towards Liz to one side.
Well, they kind of concocted it as this weird kind of twisted revenge, because Hannah really hates Liz because she knows how much Jim loves her.
Yeah.
And Jim has kind of been stewing in prison about Liz and how she's abandoned him.
Yeah.
So they kind of like decide between the two of them that Liz deserves to pay for her crimes.
Yeah, but once Jim actually gets going with it, he's like, oh no, I'm not really up to this.
I can't. She's so beautiful with her zigzag necklace and her crunchy hair.
So he decides to extort the money from Johnny Connor instead.
He's not going to need it.
Well, Jim had found out that Johnny had a one-night stand with Liz behind Jenny's back long beforehand. Eventually, Hannah gets caught out because Kirk, of all people, inadvertently ends up filming her collecting a bag of blackmail money from Victoria Gardens. Johnny shows Liz the footage of this.
She's like,
and
what?
She realises that she's been conned.
I don't understand why you can't just cart around money for American medical expenses in holdalls. I'm sure that's how they pay for it in America. Is somebody write in and let us know? Do you not just turn up to the hospital with a big sack of cash and go, I'm ill?
So Liz confronts Hannah about this, but Hannah says, look, I was just blackmailing Johnny because I was teaching him a lesson for cheating on Jenny, that's all.
Oh, okay.
Which Liz I think she believes it for a little bit, but she ends up finding the real truth about how sordid this whole matter was when she walks in on Jim and Hannah snogging in the loos.
Gross.
I think it was during Steve and Tracy's wedding, possibly. Liz is absolutely disgusted because obviously up to this point she was led to believe that Hannah was her and Jim's daughter, and now she's found Jim snogging the face of her.
Gross.
And there's an amazing confrontation scene between Jim and Liz at baby Katie's graveside at St Mary's Church, where she pushes him down on the floor and she's like, how could you? This is disgusting. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Jim kind of goes off ashamed, but on his way, he ends up just hopping into a taxi with Hannah, doesn't he? Which I did not like that they did, because I thought that the whole story was just kind of very grubby. It was quite disrespectful of a really powerful story in the early 90s. And I thought, but towards the end I was thinking, well, Jim's changed his mind, he's seen the light, he's realised he does love Liz, okay, but then to have him kind of go off with his tail between his legs in the taxi with Hannah, that didn't sit right with me. And I think we hear a couple of months later that they get arrested but then are released or whatever, and that's kind of where the Jim story has been left. As far as we know, he's still knocking about with this Sheila, and you know, and that's a bit of a tragic ending. And now that Liz isn't in the programme either, I don't know whether we are going to see Jim again, because we kind of wanted him to
come back and say sorry.
To do a final reunion, a bit like Tyrone has with Fizz.
As long as Steve's in the programme,
there's always room for Jim as long as Steve's there. But yeah, with Liz not being around, it's a bit less likely. So that was evil Australian Hannah, that's what she was the last Australian character I believe we had in the show. Though Australia did get a bit of a mention earlier this year, didn't it?
Another stupid storyline.
Is there a running theme with Australia's storylines are a little bit silly?
Well, I think it's just a running Coronation Street storyline of things are a bit silly sometimes. Emma Brooker, lovely Emma. Now, she's moved to Australia with her mum Fiona at some point when she was little, but she didn't stay very long. She came back to the UK and she went to Weatherfield High. And then in 2022, so the beginning of this year, she runs someone over and kills them because she was drunk.
That's not quite how it happened, but near enough.
She was supervising Faye.
Yeah.
And Faye hit a man who then later dies, and it turns out to be the granddad of John Spear, who is just so lovely. I think he's been lobotomised. And he's just falls in love with Emma, and she falls in love with him, but they can never be together because she killed his granddad. And then he's moving to Australia. And he's moving to Australia, and then he finds out that she did it, and he doesn't really care. And so they go to Australia together, and it's just up the road from her mum. So
handy.
Happily ever after.
Yeah. So Coronation Street residents currently in Australia. We've got Emma.
Fiona.
We got Fiona. Is that it now? I think everybody else is.
Unless secretly baby Darren is still alive.
Oh yeah.
Ian Latimer's still alive.
Ian Latimer's still there in Coronation Street, isn't he? I don't think that Ted Ashley still is. I think I can't remember. I think it's relatively recently that Gerald Wells, who played Ted, died. I can't remember. I might be completely making that up. But anyway, so that is Coronation Street's on-screen Australian links. But they also, off-screen, had quite an adventure there in the early 1960s. Now, this information I got as a mixture. There was of some online sources. There was Harry Kershaw's autobiography. There was Pat Phoenix's autobiography. Basically, they had a lovely old cast trip out there in 1965.
They got invited on a state visit in 1965 to Australia.
This is absolutely
with
amazing.
Harry Kershaw. It's Pat Phoenix, who played Elsie Tanner, Doris Speed, who played Annie Walker, and Arthur Leslie, who played
Jack Walker.
Yeah, they all went together, and there's some lovely pictures of them wearing the most glamorous, beautiful outfits, like covered in furs and jewellery and stuff.
Yeah, this was an absolutely huge thing, and it seems crazy to think these days that, you know, if Coronation Street cast would be invited to go to some foreign country and be treated like royalty, basically. But that's what happened back then.
That there are like things in Canada, like events and stuff, but this wasn't like a little convention where they're signing pictures. This was like was like they were royals.
This kind of thing was unheard of back before then. They had Americans going over and they would roll out the red carpet for them, but this was the first time I believe that some just UK celebs had gone over there and got this kind of reception. And obviously all of the cast wanted to go, and but most of them there was like one or two that were like, no, I'm not flying over to Australia. But an awful lot of names were left disappointed when these three were the ones that were picked. And they went to see the Prime Minister before they left. I think they had this Downing Street event. They had a big press conference. Harry Kershaw there was asked, how are you going to carry on without your stars for a few months? And he said, there are no stars on Coronation Street, just kind of meaning
it's an ensemble.
It's an ensemble cast. And Pat Phoenix immediately jumped in there and quipped, "What Mr. Kershaw means is that we're all stars."
I love her.
Brilliant
She
line.
wouldn't let that lie, would she? Being told she's not a star to her face.
Pat Phoenix would not.
So they get swamped by fans the minute they get off the plane.
No, they don't. They build themselves up.
Before they get... Okay.
Yeah, but when they get there, the plane actually is delayed. They arrive in Sydney, I think, which is not as Anglophile a place as apparently as Melbourne and Perth back then. So they thought there'd be a load of fans there to welcome them, but because the plane is late, everyone's kind of gone home. So it's a bit of a muted reception at first, and they spend, I can't remember how long it was in Melbourne, just kind of swanning around, visiting rich Australians, drinking champagne, going on outings, appearing on chat shows.
I cannot believe I missed out on this. This is my ideal thing.
I wonder whether any footage of this still exists.
I bet there must be.
I don't know whether there would be back in those days. You know, it's hard enough to find episodes of scripted TV shows, let alone just, you know, interviews and things that they would have done there. There was one funny story that I read about, which was Doris Speed accidentally locking herself in a loo during a boat trip around Sydney Harbour, which must have been highly embarrassing for her. And then there was another one. For some reason or other, they take a jaunt to a local Sydney strip club, apparently a fairly tame one. But
so it's not a strip club then; it's more like
an exotic dancing club. And there was this one point where a dancer, a performer, is strutting down the stage in front of them, and Doris Speed ended up giving one of them a really dirty look, and she says, "Pat, she should never wear that shade of lipstick with her colouring," which is amazing.
Okay.
Then they all head off to Melbourne, and that's where they get the big reception, isn't it? So they're greeted by hundreds of fans there, including one guy who leaps out of the crowds at Pat Phoenix with a bunch of flowers and a marriage proposal. And there's another dude there who propositions Pat Phoenix in a hotel bar, and he sort of says, "Oh, you're a really beautiful woman. Come to my hotel room. I'm staying in room 202, I think it was." And she's kind of used to men of all shapes and sizes and nationalities propositioning her, partly because of her celebrity status, but it turns out that this bloke doesn't even have any idea who she was. He's been out of the bush for years, and this weekend when he met Pat Phoenix was his first trip into town for years, and he just happens to see this pretty lady in the bar and tries his luck, and the barman has to kind of show him, "No, this is a massive TV star. Nice try, mate."
Aww.
So they end up going around Melbourne. They toured.
I think it's called Mel. I think it's like more like
Melbourne. Is this like Toronto? You got to know how to say it.
Yeah, I don't think it's.
I say Melbourne.
Okay.
They meet the different. They tour the different Coronation Streets. There are 5 Coronation Streets in Melbourne. So they end up going to have a look around there. They make personal appearances. They do TV and radio interviews. All in 6 days, so it was
that seems quite
absolutely
tiring,
jam-packed in. They must have been knackered.
But that was 6 days in Melbourne.
Yes, and you know, Doris Speed and Jack Leslie weren't the springest of chickens.
And they didn't even know, did they?
No.
They didn't even know how old she was.
No, that's right. Yeah, Doris Speed was older than she said she was.
Yeah,
and
like 15 years.
I think it was only a few years after this that after Leslie ended up passing away. I can't remember when exactly it was, but so he was an old guy.
1000, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So there was also a story that Ian Kershaw talks about in his autobiography, which kind of was quite remarkable to me, was that one time when they're in Melbourne, he sees a black person down the road, and he realised that this is the first non-white face that he's seen in the whole of his time in Australia, and his tour guide or somebody there that's with him says, "Oh yeah, that'll be a student. The only black people that we let into this country are students, and then we send them back off again." God. Which kind of shows just how different and non-progressive Australia were back in those days. It was absolutely crazy to think about that then. Although, I mean, I suppose in America, I guess at around the same time, there was similar issues going on. But wow, that really stunned me. That one did. Next stop though was Adelaide, and this was the big grand finale for the Coronation Street tour, where thousands and thousands of fans crowded the airport to meet them. They couldn't even get through the terminal to get out of the airport building, so police flanked cars ended up picking up the Corrie cast and Kershaw from the like the runway, I think it was, driving them through the town. Like the traffic lights were all switched off.
That's
it
just
was literally
mad.
like a ticker tape parade for them. Confetti and that being thrown from the buildings as these huge celebrities will work their way down the road to get to Hotel Australia. And apparently this was an even bigger reception than the Beatles had arrived when they got to Australia.
When they arrived, yeah.
And the Queen Mother had just been visiting Adelaide just recently, and I think she just left the previous day, and this was a bigger reception than the Queen Mother got as well. So
that's actually
unbelievable.
Can you imagine that now? Who's as famous as that? I don't know.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody ever going anywhere who would get that sort of reception.
Apart from somebody in the royal family.
Well, yeah, maybe, but
no, I think you haven't seen lots of royal tours. They get quite big.
Do they? But certainly no TV or movie stars or anyone would get this kind of reception.
Just can't. Yeah, maybe somebody in Marvel or I don't know.
They wouldn't have thousands of people lining the streets sprinkling confetti just because Tom Holland.
Zendaya, maybe.
I wouldn't be there anyway.
No, you wouldn't. You don't know who they are.
Marvel films. Anyway, there was They
went to all the Coronation Streets there as well.
Yeah. They have lunch at Parliament House. They visit the local vineyards as well.
Stay there for 5 days.
5 days, so it was cramming it in as well. And apparently they ended up getting sore hands from all the handshaking that they had to do. So they had to go to see an Australian doctor there who he said he diagnosed them with having the royal complaint. It's just like the royals, much handshaking was done. And there was also a really lovely story talking about doctory, medical kind of things. There's this one woman, a 30-year-old woman, who pushes to the front of the crowds where Pat Phoenix is at one point and says, look, my mum is a huge Corrie fan. She'd love to come and meet you, but she's bedridden at the moment. And because she only lived 5 minutes down the road, Pat Phoenix goes and gives her a visit, and she kind of pops her head around this woman's bedroom and says, hello, love, they tell me you're poorly.
Aww.
I just imagine that. I mean,
imagine if you were in Australia and then somebody from a completely different continent just pops in, like the most famous person you knew that you loved.
This would be like Kylie Minogue coming to visit us at the moment, wouldn't it?
I wouldn't say...
That's the closest I can think of at the moment.
Well, I would be as shocked if Pat Phoenix came now.
So yeah, not only was this somebody from the other side of the world coming to visit her, but it was somebody who had recently just been treated to a greater welcome than the Beatles. Just popping around your house for a cup of tea to see you because you were poorly.
Imagine the egos on everybody after this.
Oh, I know.
You would never convince me to do my own laundry again after this. I'd be like, no, far too important. Everybody loves me. You can do it. Wash my pants.
I don't know. I bet Arthur Leslie was pretty
been.
humble about it.
That's what Kevin won't wash his own pants.
So when they left Australia, over 50,000 people lined the streets of Adelaide to see them off, according to the local newspaper. It's just completely unbelievable, and I don't think anything like that has been seen before or since. Although there have been one or two other Corrie trips to Australia.
What kind of show? I mean, maybe Game of Thrones?
I just don't know.
Big? I really don't know. Yeah, because I can't imagine those a bunch of actors from Game of Thrones going to Australia and people lining the streets.
It wouldn't happen.
I think it's because everything's much more fragmented now. So I don't think that we really think too much about it. But back in the day, there were 4 programmes on the telly. So these people would have been more famous than anyone who's famous now. Yeah, they would have been, because they would have been on your telly, and they would have been the only things on your telly, and they would have been there every day, twice a week.
Well, they were also seen as untouchable, weren't they? It's only in the past 10 years or so that we've had Twitter where celebrities, the barrier between us and them has been broken down a little bit. But crazy times.
True. That is true. Yeah, the celebrity mystique has kind of disappeared now. You know what? I don't know.
What they're having for breakfast.
Yeah, they're having breakfast and they're having bowel problems.
Well, that's it for the Coronation Street big stories, but I have got a final roundup of random Coronation Street trivia. Well, I've got the bullet pointed list here. I think we should tag team them. So I'm going to start off. Did you know, Gemma and listeners, Todd Boyce, who plays Stephen Reed, lived in Australia when he was little. He was obviously born in America, as we know, not Canada, but he moved from America to Germany to Brazil before finally settling in Australia, and that's where he trained to be an actor. So he went to the National Institute of Dramatic Arts in Sydney, and his TV debut was in fact in an Australian soap called The Restless Years.
Just imagine about all the Australian grannies are well impressed that he ended up in Coronation Street.
I bet they are.
They're like, oh my God, I remember when Pat Phoenix came to Adelaide, it's the best day of my life.
So I did see a couple of people criticising Todd's performance last week when he was having... Yeah, Todd Boyce's performance last week when he was having a go at Kevin. Well, you've got Australia to blame for that, I'm afraid, because that's who trained him up.
There's a lot to say about Australia in this episode.
Yeah.
Tristan Gemmell.
Yeah, Tristan Gemmell.
He lived in Australia between the ages of 15 and 25, and he studied drama at Melbourne University.
Yes, so another alum from Australia is Tristan Gemmell.
Yeah, Ina Sharples, she was absent from the show for 2 months in 1968 when she went on a promotional tour.
Yes, this was a few years later.
Not the character, the actress.
Yes. Yeah, the character at the time was said to be visiting her brother in America. So she ends up, Violet Carson,
yes.
Going over to Australia. She doesn't fly like Pat and Co did a few years previously, because apparently she refused to because she'd been in too many flimsy aircraft during the Second World War. So she came down here to Southampton, which has been quite cool. If only we'd have been here back then, we could have waved her off.
Would have been too young.
Little bit too young in 1968, yeah, just 15 years or so too early.
Yep.
So yeah, she ends up sailing off to Australia on the Oriana, a 12,000 mile trip round, stopping off at various islands and stuff on the way. And she spends the cruise, not all the time, but some of the time, singing to the second class passengers to keeping them entertained, which is quite lovely. So what, the first class
passengers don't like Coronation Street? Bunch of toffs. I like this. I like this that she's like, I'm not going to fly, and everyone's like, oh, he's such a diva, and she's like, yeah, because I was in World War II, and it was like, okay,
she's earned her
literally
diva.
Can't say anything about that, can you? In 1964. Ken and Valerie were supposed to emigrate to Australia, and then Harry Kershaw came in and he was like, no, I want to keep them in the show.
Yeah, he was the new producer in 64.
Ida, you've written?
Yeah, Ken's mum.
Yeah, okay. Ida worried that Ken was going to go in 1961 because he found a book about Australia in his room, but he says, no, it's just my friend's book.
Yeah, there were a couple of times when we nearly lost Ken
just
to
like
the Australians
London Lovelies
that he
wasn't
just stayed in.
Jack's book.
Yes. Esther Hayes' eldest sister Ada lived at number 5 Coronation Street in the pre-Coronation Street times of the show before emigrating to Australia in 1949. This is apparently later a retcon to the character later, because early in the 1960s Esther talks about popping over to go and visit her sister as well, which one assumes she wouldn't have done if it meant popping over to Australia.
Maybe one time in the future people will just pop over to Australia to go and see their relative. That would be really quite cool.
Maybe. Chalky Whiteley is another character actually we missed out earlier, who emigrated to Australia in 1983. This is just like a month and a half or so after I was born, actually. He ends up winning a load of money on a 5-horse accumulator. He gets £3,543.75 on a 5-horse accumulator.
That's just under 10 grand.
That's pretty good. It's enough for him to go and emigrate over to Australia, because his son Bob and his grandson Craig had moved there the previous year, and there's a little story in 1982 of Chalky, who's a pretty old guy, looking after his grandson and kind of struggling to look after him, and it's because of him that we've got to thank for Phyllis Pearce coming into the show as well, haven't we? Because Phyllis was Craig's maternal grandma, I think, or from the other side, etc.
Now, we said earlier that Emma Brooker was the only and Fiona Middleton were the only Coronation Street people in Australia at the moment, but we're wrong, aren't we? Because Charlie and Lexi Franklin are in Australia.
Yeah, the Bolter family
with their fat adopted family.
Yes, but it's all right. They can pop back for Christmas, can't they? To
fine.
Play a few games of Kaplunk and then
for like a day.
Yeah, and then go back off again. Remember Frida? Everybody loves Frida, especially that amazing scene at the community centre last year. In 2009, she had a fiance called St John, and he was a bit of an activist, and he was put in Australian prison back then for punching a policeman during a political rally.
Oh dear. Yeah, okay. Where was this?
That was here.
Curly
goes
backpacking to Australia in 1998, And he came back and he found that his house, Jackie and Tyrone Dobbs were squatting in it. So that was a bit annoying.
Another Australian-born Coronation Street actor was Sam Retford. If you remember, he played Curtis last year. He was born in Gosford, New South Wales.
Suzanne Hall, who played Kimberly Taylor, she was born in Australia.
Yeah. And there was, I don't know if you remember this one as well, in 2016 at Christmas, Tim buys Sally a globe, which turns out to be a little bit dodgy because there was no Australia on it.
Yes. Now, they often, I've said this before when the story came up, they often leave New Zealand off of maps and globes. It's quite funny to
it's quite
notice,
a feat
to leave Australia. It's like a continent.
Out, yeah.
When Ashley thought Fred was his uncle, he'd been led to believe that his natural mother lived in Australia, but actually she lived in Oldham, which is not the same place.
No,
different.
Not quite the same place. I don't know whether some of this trivia is getting less interesting as the list is going on. Well, this next one's quite good. Peter Armitage, who played Bill Webster, went on a 13,000-mile motorbike tour of Australia in 1980, and he went around the country busking for a living, and this is a few years before he got the job as Bill Webster on Coronation Street. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, okay. I can imagine him doing that. It's quite cool, isn't it, when he was younger?
Yeah.
Ryan Thomas, he played Raphael Humphreys in 17 episodes of Neighbours in 2018.
Yes, now he was Jason Grimshaw in Coronation Street.
And he's like, I'm not doing this no more. I'm sick of being an actor. March 2021, he gave up. Yeah, so
he was Coronation Street's only actor who then moved to Neighbours. So we did a little exchange, didn't we? Because we got that actress who came on from Neighbours who was in Coronation Street for a little bit. So we sent them Ryan Thomas back.
Do you want Ryan Thomas? Yeah. And they're like, yeah, all right.
Fine,
and then I don't like him anymore. You can have him back.
17 episodes he was in the show, but he is no longer an actor. He retired from it last year. He said, fed up of getting rejected at auditions.
I think I can totally sympathise with that.
I think it's a bit sad. I'd happily have Jason back to Coronation Street.
Well, no, that's what it is. He was ace. Why you give up acting when you know that you could just go back to Coronation Street? That's what I do.
And that is literally all I could find about Australia and Coronation Street. That's an hour's worth of contents of Australian Corrie stuff, which I didn't think I'd ever be able to squeeze out, but there we go. But
I like that.
I enjoyed that too. And it is a nice segue, actually, to the next bit of the podcast where we're going to be talking about Neighbours. Like, as we said, it is no more. It had its final week last week, and we decided last week it would be a silly idea not to watch it. So we settled down for half an hour every day last week, a bit more on Friday, to watch the final week. So I thought some people might be interested to know what we thought about it and our Neighbours viewing experience. So we move on to talking a bit about EastEnders, about Neighbours now.
Yeah.
So, Gemma, you mentioned that on the podcast before, but you used to watch Neighbours a little bit when you were younger, didn't you?
I really don't know when I watched it or why I watched it. I suppose I watched it with my parents. But when we were watching Neighbours this week, I was like, I don't remember a lot of this stuff. I remember Harold. I remember Toadie. I remember there was a doctor's surgery. I remember there was the pond. There was a pond with the bridge over it. I remember there was a scene. There was a load of scenes where there was a ditzy blonde lady who was a vegetarian, but she didn't know that pigs and pork were the same thing, so she ate pork, and then everyone told her and she was shocked. That was probably the most vivid thing, apart from also I remember when Helen Daniels died, because I watched that episode and they were watching TV and she died holding someone's hand and the girl didn't say anything.
That was a flashback they had in last week's episode, wasn't it? I'm sure they had a flashback to Helen.
I remember Madge, and I never watched it when Kylie was in it. I didn't know that Guy Pearce was in it.
Yeah.
I don't think I expected when I watched it to be quizzed on it 20, 30 years later.
No, you got to be prepared for these things.
So my memories of Neighbours is very scattered.
Did the houses look familiar and the general layout of the street?
Maybe. Yeah, I guess so.
See, I hadn't watched any Neighbours whatsoever. It's definitely a bit of a student culture-y thing over here in the UK.
Well, there was always a boy in my college, which is not the same as American college, English classes, who would always be late after lunch because he said he watched Neighbours and he thought that was an acceptable excuse, and he wouldn't listen to anybody who told him that you couldn't just be late to everything because Neighbours was on.
Yeah. So what kind of were you expecting in the run up to the final episode of Neighbours, and did it kind of match what you thought it would be?
Did I know that they were all going to move out? I can't remember. I thought they were going to end it like Brookside, I think. Where they just demolish the whole thing and go, that's the end, no more.
I literally didn't know anything, or because I've never seen Neighbours before, I don't, have any special place in my heart for it. I've not really looked that much into it, but you couldn't avoid seeing all the reports of the returning cast members that there were going to be. Obviously, Kylie and Jason coming back playing, was it Charlene and some guy? So this is just going to show how badly we know about this. But yeah, so I knew that they were going to come back, and then there were other old characters, but they meant nothing to me. I'd heard the name Toadfish because it's a funny name.
I imagined that they would demolish it, but then at the end they'd have a big party, and all the celebrities that had been mentioned would turn up to this party and be drinking champagne and things, and they would all have like a very brief cameo where they said something poignant. And then at the end, they would all kind of like look on tearfully as the whole street gets demolished. That's what I thought would happen.
But that didn't happen at all, really, did it?
No.
Well, as the week went on, it turned out that everybody was planning to sell up and move away from Ramsay Street.
Monday's episode ended with those two characters. I forgot what their names are.
I don't remember what their names are.
They were the only ones that were going to stay, and they came out and everybody had their house up for sale. And they were like, oh no.
Yeah.
And they were also somebody was writing a book. Was it Harold was writing a book? I don't know who
No, I don't think Harold was writing a book.
There was a history book about Ramsay Street.
Yeah.
And they had all the pictures in it about all the people that used to live there. And everyone had to write something in it about themselves and the pictures.
I thought that was a really nice way
sweet.
to reference the past. I think on the whole, they did a really good job with making it feel kind of nostalgic for people who had nostalgia for the show, but still carrying on some lingering storylines from what I could tell. I mean, it took a while for me to get who was who, and I've forgotten most of the characters' names now and everything, and knowing who's related to who and who's going out with who and who fancies who and everything like that.
By the end I didn't know.
Oh yeah, definitely. By the time I kind of understood, I'm not even going to say the majority, a good enough chunk of it to be able to follow who was going on and be shocked when I was supposed to be shocked. It was basically the end of the show. But I did really enjoy watching it, and I'm glad that we did. And I didn't know what to expect, particularly in terms of what the acting would be like, what the production values would be like. Even things like the episode lengths, they seemed really short to me.
I think they're about the same as Corrie.
I think that they ran a bit shorter than Corrie because the adverts came very, very quickly. It felt
like it went a bit longer.
Although speaking of the adverts, one thing I did definitely appreciate was the Specsavers idents that they had.
It was really good.
It was really clever, wasn't it? You know how we have our sponsored by Argos adverts before Coronation Street now, and they've got a Specsavers one, but they put this this optician kind of superimposer into old scenes of Neighbours. Like there's one character, no idea who this was. It says, "Oh, he's not got a roving eye, has he?" And then the woman says, "Oh no, he just needs an eye test or something."
It was brilliant.
It's better than that. But anyway,
they did a good job, better than you did.
Thanks. But I thought that was very, very clever. But I thought it all felt, pretty slick. But there were definitely differences in production to Coronation Street, some of which I would not want Coronation Street to adopt, like that music in the background. There are quite a lot of scenes, and I knew that I had known that Australian soaps, well, probably most soaps around the world actually do this, but it still caught me a bit by surprise when they had these little musical flourishes to underline the drama of a particular scene.
This is important. You're going to be sad.
Yeah, it wasn't so on the nose as a da da da
they
sort of
done that
thing.
though, shouldn't
but
they?
yeah, every now and then they would have a little. Or there was one character that came back, and another character runs to give them a hug, and there's this big, it's a 5-second little. Sort of, it was
like a Zelda opening a chest.
Yeah, kind of. I think that Coronation Street are better off not doing that, and I don't think that mostly it added much to the scenes, although there were some really, really sad scenes where having a bit of sad music over the top of it probably did enhance it quite a bit, but not so much that I'd want Corrie to adopt it.
Well, there's loads of spoilers here. If you haven't seen the last week of Neighbours, then I don't know why you'd be listening to this and getting mad at us if we reveal what happened. But basically, Toadie was getting married to his bird. Mm-hmm. I don't know what her name was.
I liked her.
I did not like her.
You didn't like her. You found her a bit too in your face and over the top and Didn't you? But I thought she was lovely.
I'm probably everyone's mad at me because she's probably everyone's favourite character. But they were getting married, and then everyone was going to move, and then at the end, the party was their wedding party, wasn't it? And because everyone was moving and also talking about this book, this history book, a bunch of old residents of Ramsay Street like did their video messages, and it was all just the people that can be bothered to turn up.
I just thought everything was a really, really clever way of doing it, because when I heard all these characters are coming back for the final few weeks of Coronation,
I imagine them being there.
I thought that they'd all just turn
Neighbours?
up. Neighbours. I thought they'd all just turn up and swamp everybody. And then they'd maybe overshadow the existing cast, and some of them were there in the flesh, like that Guy Pearce character. Mike, was he called? Mike Young?
Yes.
And
Kylie and Jason were there.
They turned
but they were weird because they kind of like felt like they weren't really there, but they were there.
I think that they filmed their scenes quite separately from most of the rest of the cast.
It looked like they did.
There was a bit when they were up on the balcony towards the end, and I think one of them was superimposed. One of the other cast members was superimposed on the end of the balcony. I think I read that somewhere. But Kylie surprised me because she had very few lines. It was Jason Donovan's character that had. I know, were they paying Kylie Minogue by the word? Maybe, I'm not sure. But yeah, it was cool to have her back. But the way that they had the video messages for Toadie and Mrs. Toadie at the end of the episode was
Fish.
Very, very clever. Because they used to do this back in the early days of Coronation Street, didn't they? When
this
they had
is
the telegrams.
what we were saying when we were watching, like, this is just like an old school Corrie wedding, and it would have been, the thing I loved about the old school Corrie weddings when they read out the telegrams is that would have been exactly how it would have been in the day, because people wouldn't have been able to afford to take time off work or travel or whatever. So it was kind of funny how there was that little kind of link to Coronation Street.
Yeah, it was really, really cute.
And the thing about it is that all the people that were in it, they were doing videos and they were talking about that they were actually talking about themselves, but they could have plausibly been in character, because they were saying, the time I spent on Ramsay Street was like the greatest time of my life. I miss everybody.
Yeah.
And it was really sweet and like I say, poignant, because you knew that they were talking about themselves, and it was heartfelt. And
I recognised Natalie Imbruglia from her pop star days of the late 90s, although I think I'd forgotten that she was even in Neighbours, and I was absolutely not expecting her to show up in that final episode. I was like, I know that person, that's Natalie Imbruglia, she sang Torn. And then also in the video messages, Mark Little's character appeared, and I remember Mark Little because he used to present the Big Breakfast over here on Channel 4 for a little while when I was younger. So I was like, that was cool. I think I'd read that he was going to come back.
There were loads of other really massive names, and I can't remember them all. But one thing I will say about Neighbours is that it is such a powerhouse of talent. I don't think that you could get for Coronation Street like people who've been in Hollywood films, and Neighbours just has a real rich sort of history of very, very talented, very ambitious people making their start on Corrie, and I wonder what the difference is. Why don't we have as many?
And if you look at the biggest names that have come out of Coronation Street, like Sarah Lancashire,
Sam Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they'd be the equivalent, but I don't think they've reached such high echelons of fame as Kylie Minogue or Guy Pearce.
No, I don't know what it is. Is it because Neighbours doesn't give them enough, like, what's the word? Whatever. It doesn't fulfil their ambition, so they go on somewhere else, whereas Coronation Street is kind of like the premiere
I don't know.
soap, but I'm just saying that because I'm a Coronation Street person, so I'm going to say that it's the best.
It is the best.
But yeah, it was very impressive to see all these people, and
I suppose that with me, I didn't necessarily realise in the episode running up to the final one who was a returnee, or some of them are saying, you're back, but as far as I know, they might have been away for a week. Yeah, exactly, or gone to the shop. So I didn't go, like when that woman turned up who was pregnant, the party started here. It's like, has she been away from the programme for a long time? I couldn't really tell.
Are we happy that she's pregnant? Yeah, I guess so.
I don't know. But I mean, the mainstay characters...
It wasn't for us, though.
No,
anything that I'm saying that's a criticism of it is absolutely under the understanding that this was not for me. I know it's not for me. No, not
in the slightest.
I don't feel like anything should have been changed to accommodate people like us who didn't know what they were watching.
Having a previously on Neighbours was enough for us, I suppose. But the actual flashbacks and how they worked them into the episodes was quite good.
So I remember when that happened.
And I was watching some of the scenes going, was this a major scene that they're flashing back to, like some people at a fancy dress party or whatever, or were they just random clips? I don't know. But
was it like something that everyone who watches Neighbours would be like, oh yeah, or is it like, oh?
Because it made me think, would I want that in the final week of Coronation Street? But everything that went on in this last week of Neighbours was making me think, if Touchwood Coronation Street was also having its final week, would I want it to go this way? And would having old clips be suitable, or would it be cheesy? Would I want them to all be moving away or not move away? Would I want there to be no big explosions? And a lot of what I was thinking was, this kind of was a pretty perfect way to end a soap, really. Yeah, they could have a history of Coronation Street book.
If they were to steal this idea wholesale from Neighbours, I don't think that they would be barking up the wrong tree. I think this was very touching, very sympathetic, not too showy, very respectful way to end this soap.
Yeah, and having a wedding going on in the last episode was lovely, and it wasn't a wedding where the bride had secretly had it off with her husband's brother, or
they were both very happy.
Yeah, they were. It was a very joyous occasion, and that's kind of what you want, really. And I've thought loads of times over the years about how would Coronation Street end, what would be the best way, and some of the ways I've thought is having a big explosions and stunts and everything, and maybe that wouldn't be suitable now I've seen Neighbours doing it this way.
Well, they had to save all their money for the CG confetti.
Oh yeah, that didn't look so good, did it?
Yeah, well, it was probably a good idea not to use real confetti.
The other bit that really, really stood out as being, this is a set, is that view out of the window of that... Where was it, at the hotel, or was it in someone's house?
No, it was Paul Daniels' house. I've forgotten his name. Very famous character that I should know.
Can't remember the name of it at all. Yeah, they had a very, very obvious painted or photographed backdrop just outside the window, didn't they? And Coronation Street does use those, but generally people have got net curtains so you can't see, or the door creaks open a little bit.
If you watch older episodes of Coronation Street, they really phased it out. But back in the old days, they would just have a painted board outside a window. They don't really do that anymore because it doesn't look on modern TVs with the high res. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, back in the 60s on Coronation Street, sometimes they didn't even have the full set constructed, did they? And they'd be standing there on outside number 5 Coronation Street, and then the Rovers would literally be a painted board mere metres away from where the actors are standing.
And the wall was the road painted up into the sky.
Yeah.
And they had to keep the camera angle exactly as it was, otherwise it would be obvious there was a 90-degree bend.
Yeah, but in modern days you can't really get away with that, but still Neighbours tried it, and
why should they change so well final week? Whatever.
So as for the kind of the other main stories, I really enjoyed, and again I should have a character list. I planned to bring a character name list with me, but I forgot to do it. I enjoyed the story of that woman who was torn between the two men, and she was going to be going off with one, but then her old flame from the past came back, and she kind of imagines him there in a lounge and everything. You know which character I'm talking about if you're listening to this. I thought that was really sweet, and having her end off with him was very nicely done. I definitely sympathised with that character.
There's loads of stuff that I just did not... It went over my head completely.
The vast
at the end they were like, oh, I'm not going to sell Lassiter's anymore to this man.
Yeah.
I'm going to sell it to another man, or am I going to keep it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't remember. I wasn't really sure.
I think there was a lot there that would.
And it's that lady that was shagging around with that bloke who had the cars, or was she or not? I don't remember.
Oh yeah, there was that woman who was caught snogging the guy in the front of the car, wasn't there?
Yeah. Well, okay, good for her. I liked the Everyone hated her, didn't they? And then they forgave her or something. I'm not sure. Was that someone else? I don't remember. The shaggy lady.
I don't remember.
And then also we had. I think the thing I liked a lot about it, apart from what we've already mentioned, is the sets. I really liked that little train carriage cafe.
Oh yeah, that's lovely.
I loved the watering hole. I loved the Lassiter's stuff. I really liked the little shop and the cafe and everything.
I just loved how verdant it all looked.
Yeah, it looked really lush and lovely, and it all looked like a real kind of upmarket, cool place to be. And I think on Coronation Street, there are some cool places, trendy places, but we don't have a cool cafe, and I really wish we did.
Yeah, it felt like...
when I watch Emmerdale, I get jealous of their farm shop. I think that's really cool.
I get jealous of all the surrounding, fields
Emmerdale
and nature and everything on Emmerdale. Whereas Coronation Street,
you can't
relocate
Weatherfield.
It is in the middle of a city. They moved it to Media City a few years ago, but at the end of the day, there's city around it. You can't show these sprawling or aerial shots or anything. I don't know how much if you zoomed out of Neighbours. But it felt like you could see down the road and there were other houses down there, weren't there? Well,
there was a bit where they were walking in front of like a load of boutique like shops, and they were talking about, I'm going to put in a nail bar. I can't remember. Yeah, but I liked it.
There was a real sheen to the production that Coronation Street doesn't have, and I'm not saying that it needs it at all. Like the music and everything, that can go in the bin as far as I'm concerned if they ever tried to put that in Coronation Street. But it was a really really interesting experience seeing how the other side live and what another soap is like, and it definitely felt right to watch the final episodes.
Go on.
And I really, really enjoyed that speech that Susan gave at the end of it, where because she starts off, she's asked to write the foreword for the history of Ramsay Street.
She doesn't want to do it because she's sort of sad that everyone's leaving.
Yeah,
but she sort of feels like, what's the point?
Yeah, but then it turns into what she's writing turns into like a coda or epilogue speech for the series, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was really well done.
It was
very neat.
Absolutely perfectly written, and there were bits in there that were in universe and bits in there that were out of universe. Well, they were in universe, but they felt like they were out of universe. Like she talks about people who watched us from afar, which in universe,
you wouldn't write that in a talking about a street that you lived on. It'd be creepy.
It felt right. It'd
be like
me.
The TV license man.
It felt like people. There's a real heart and a community in this street, and people from from outside of Ramsay Street have come in and stuff. But it was obviously a big shout out to the viewers. Particularly, I think it was a shout out to foreign, particularly UK viewers, because this is a country where it's got its largest international audience. And then in that speech, it also talked about, I wonder what the characters would be like, people who were taken from before their time, and there were like some ghosts of characters.
Well, hang on, I think it was just Madge.
No, there was a few. There was like 5 or so I've read since.
Did you?
Yeah. They had Madge.
I saw Madge.
Was she? She was a fairly famous character.
Yes.
I don't know.
That was the bit I recognised Madge, and I was like, that really got me. That was because she looked so serene as well.
Yeah, she was just sitting there at a table along with somebody else.
She also looked beautiful.
Apparently there was a villain that showed up, because I think she was talking about, that we've seen heroes and villains, and then some guys walking along the street, and that's supposed to be a Neighbours villain of the past. And as it sounds like it should be silly, but in the same way that Vera's ghost coming back to see Jack was absolutely perfect for me, I think that this worked from an outsider's point of view really, really well, as a very respectful look back to the past, a thank you everybody for watching. Isn't it sad that it's over, but life still goes on. That
was the thing. It felt like the fact that nobody moved out in the end, and Toadie and his wife were like, we can't go, how could we leave now?
I really like Toadfish as a character.
To be continued, but you're not coming with us.
I really enjoyed Toadfish as a character. I don't know whether it can't be anything to do with the fact that he's been in it a long time, but it just felt like he was very kind of natural and friendly and just a fun guy, really.
Yeah.
Whereas everybody else, I liked a lot of the other characters, but he was one that particularly stood out to me.
Well, he was the one that was getting married, so he was the. Yeah. And it was quite refreshing to watch a whole week of somebody getting married without them having an argument or
there were bits of drama there, but nothing huge.
And people coming in and being like, "Oh, come for your wedding." It just felt very natural. And you know, if I was in charge of Coronation Street, I'd be watching this going, "Oh God damn it!" Now
we can never end because we can't top
that because it was really, really fantastic. And if we do something similar, everyone's going to be like, "Oh, it wasn't as good as the Neighbours one." Or
maybe it just means they have to leave it a long time before Coronation Street ends, so everybody forgets.
This would be in my back pocket if I was I was ever considering. It was just really good.
But I mean, equally, I also thought that when there was the idea of we're all moving out of Ramsay Street came up, I thought, oh yeah, that's not a bad idea. But apparently a load of fans didn't like that idea, and they thought that was a bit of a cheat, having everybody move out. But then obviously that was a bit of a twist at the end, that actually they were staying. I suppose the difference with Coronation Street is, I mean, Ramsay Street, there were 5-6 houses maybe?
It's a little cul-de-sac.
Yeah, whereas with Coronation Street, you could literally not have everybody deciding to up and leave.
Yes, you could, because you would demolish it. That would be the most obvious way of doing it. Because
it's been threatened in the past.
But the fact that it's still there, I know that there are other places like that in the area, but they really are.
Yeah,
sort of.
There's just more people in Coronation Street that it would affect, and I think even with all the returning cast members that Neighbours had last week, they still probably had a cast that was smaller than Coronation Street on an average week.
But can I just point out, we had a quasi kind of story like this with Ray threatening to demolish.
The street.
So it was kind of like that, really.
People all selling up. Yeah.
But I was just thinking, like in real life, if everybody on Ramsay Street, apart from one family, decided to move and put the house up for sale, and you went to go and view a house there, wouldn't you be like, is there like a gas leak or a chemical spill or something here?
Or a sinkhole.
Or are they really noisy and annoying or something? And everyone hates them, that's why they've moved.
Yeah. Something else I was reading about the final week, there was an article on Digital Spy that I saw about all the little Easter eggs that they put in, and they like made references to fan things that they'd noticed. Like in the last episode, one of the characters said, "Oh, why is it called Street? Because it's not even a street, it's like a cul-de-sac or whatever that you said."
Close, yeah.
And they would... and when they were looking through the old photo albums, they saw one character played by a few actors, and somebody made a comment saying, "Oh, it looks like they reinvented themselves so many times," or stuff like that. I thought that was quite cool.
Didn't get that at all.
No, exactly. All of that kind of stuff completely passed us by, but it was really nice that they put it in there for the fans. It felt like they really wanted to make it just right for the fans, and
they did a really good job.
I think they did a really, really good job. Very glad I watched it.
Should be proud of themselves.
But I mean, if it came back, which I don't think it will, it's not like I'm going to jump in and watch it again. But it felt like, as a soap podcaster, a moment of TV history that it would be.
Yeah, that's right.
Remiss.
We have to tribute. We have to pay tribute, and we have to uphold and uplift other soaps, even though they're rivals. You know, and there's a funny kind of I don't want EastEnders to win this or whatever, or this so-and-so's crap, but. Really, it's kind of like the herd is stronger together, isn't it? And one less soap is really not good, in my opinion. And it's sad that it ended. And I think it's shocking that such a big name as Neighbours is come to an end. But I think that they bade it farewell with passion just and imagine love and respect.
Just imagine if it had been cancelled and they just had to stop making the episode, which has happened to many other series in the past, or if they'd planned something and it just went down like a lead balloon with viewers. That would have been awful. And that's kind of my worst fear if Corrie ever comes to an end, that they do a real hash job of the final week.
Well, don't need to worry about that.
Hopefully, don't need to worry about that anymore. No. So anyway, that was our final thoughts.
That was incredibly clumsy and ignorant.
What's more can you expect from us? It was nearly half an hour of us
tried
talking
our
about
best.
a program that we didn't know anything about.
We watched it. We didn't pick up on most things, which I don't think is. I think if a soap is 37 years in the making and you can understand everything that happens in the final week, I think that is doing something wrong. So yeah, well done everyone. It was really heartwarming, and Neighbours is going to be remembered, isn't it, for a long time, forever, I guess. It's part of television history, and it's been the birth of many great careers, and it's sad to see it go.
Yeah, very sad to see it go. Now, this was going to be the end of the podcast, but I've got an extra special treat to tack on to the end of this here, because I've been in touch with the Neighbours podcast, and that's Nay and then Buzz, which is obviously a Neighbours podcast that's been going for a good few years over in Australia, and I've been in touch with their hosts, and I haven't done it yet. As I'm recording this on Tuesday, I have not yet spoken to them, but I'm going to be chatting with them about what they thought about the final few months and week of Neighbours. So I'm just going to kind of cut to that now, and maybe we'll come back at the end and say what we thought about it. But anyway, over to me in the future and Neighbours podcast. So now to join me on the podcast, I'm really thrilled to be talking right over the other side of the world to Vaya from the Neighbours podcast. Hello.
Hello. What a thrill. I've changed streets.
I'm really, really excited. Yeah, from Ramsay Street to Coronation Street. I think you're the furthest away guest we've ever had on the podcast, that's for sure.
Really?
How are you?
Well, it's a bleak week for us.
I know.
It's we get Neighbours over here. We got Neighbours over here at 6:30 p.m. on weeknights.
Mm-hmm.
And that first Monday back after the last episode, we were all just a bit at sea, wandering around like, what do we watch?
What do we watch now? Yeah, I'm so gutted for you that it's ended. I mean, do you remember the moment that you heard that Channel 5 would be pulling the funding for Neighbours, which kind of meant the writing was likely to be on the wall?
Yeah, well, we'd heard it a few times. So it was a bit like The Boy Who Cried Wolf. So we saw the rumours in whatever trash tabloid papers put it out there. And straight away, we all jumped on messaging each other and writing in our Facebook group, well, don't believe the rumours. They happen all the time. Every time there's contract negotiations or whatever it is. And then it just kept sticking around. And we were thinking, okay, this is weird. This is the longest people are talking about it. Then when the big meeting happened on the set where they said cast and crew had stopped production for the day. And we got wind of that and we thought, oh no, this is dire.
Serious.
Yeah.
Did you kind of hold out the hope that someone else would pick it up and the show would be able to carry on?
Definitely. And I think that's what's made these last few months extra anxiety inducing, is that I was part of the Save Neighbours movement. So we had thousands of people tweeting, signing petitions, writing emails to networks, begging somebody to take it. And then we were using up a lot of energy in those weeks. And then it seemed like, no, there was just nothing to be done. It was just a financial decision and no one was really willing to wear that cost. So then we had to find new energy to start sending the show off. And it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah. Did you, when did you kind of hear that it was definitely over? When did you kind of accept we're into our last kind of final months of Neighbours now?
For me, I mean, there were press releases that went out, but for me, the penny dropped when I saw the writing staff post a picture on Twitter of their final lunch, their farewell lunch, that they were having at Teresa's backyard set, Rebecca Almaloglu. And that was it for me. I thought, what do you mean? You need writers. You need your writers. What do you mean it's their last day? And that's when it hit for me. And I was really depressed at that point.
Did you have any ideas of how you kind of wanted the show to play out its final months? Did you kind of say, oh, I want these characters to do this, I want this story to end this way, or this is what I imagine the final week to be in for me?
All I really wanted were the Kennedy kids, or at least Billy and Anne, to come and visit Mum and Dad at the Kennedy house. But we got some video calls happening, but it wasn't quite what I would have hoped. But also, I just kind of knew that they would end it in a lovely way. And so I didn't really have grand expectations. I thought a lot of returning cast would come. I thought a lot of heritage cast would come back, and I'm super glad that they did, especially Guy Pearce stealing the show. It was, he and Annie Jones just ran away with it. It was amazing. But I just kind of got the sense that the current production team had a good sensibility about how they would say goodbye. And there were things I didn't agree with. Paul Robinson getting a happy ending, not a romantic hero in my eyes, but there were lots of lovely touches and an amazing event. They had obviously Toadie and Mel's wedding that I hear was days and days of very long shooting days. It wasn't just one big party. So I knew that they would put a lot of thought into it, and it did not disappoint in any way. So it was a really lovely way for them to go out
Yeah. Are you glad that they went out with a happy ending rather than like a massive stunt or an explosion or, which they could have done? Demolish
Yeah,
the street.
definitely. We've had enough. Oh my goodness, we've had enough terrorism on that street, on that cul-de-sac. So I just couldn't take it. A lot of us couldn't take it. There was a major character death. Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
Just a young couple got married, and then Hendrix died of a failed lung transplant. And that was just excruciating to sit through because we were all sad anyway, and then we were extra sad. And so I just thought, please, let's have a party.
So how long ago did that happen?
A month ago. It was, and also in Australia, we had a bit of a truncated broadcast schedule because of shenanigans, because first the UK fell behind, then they started showing extra episodes, then Australia was falling behind, and then to catch up to the finale, the network started screening first 60-minute episodes a night and then 90-minute episodes the week of the finale. And look, I don't know how much Corrie you can take all at once, but I just was referring to it as a medically unsound amount of episodes to watch back to back of a soap opera. But it was kind of like watching a movie every night, but it was so... we all lost a bit of a sense of time. We didn't know when storylines were happening, and suddenly someone was saying, let's sell the house, and then a sale sign would go up, and we just, it's been a bit of a blur. July was a blur, July 2022.
So how much, so I'll go back, you may have said this already, so how much was it usually on the air? How many hours a week did you normally get?
So it was half an hour, 5 nights a week.
Right. Okay.
And then something happened during the pandemic and it dropped to 4 nights a week in Australia, but they were shooting 6 episodes. They were making 6 episodes a week. Don't think about it too hard. It makes your brain turn to jelly. I'm going to ask very basic questions now. How long are Corrie episodes?
That's right. They're currently an hour long, so we get an hour 3 times a week. It used to be, up until earlier this year, they had 6 half-an-hour episodes a week, but they've kind of squashed them together. So they write them as 2 separate episodes, but they now put them together as one. So it was almost like a little mini movie, a short one every 3 times a week.
Sometimes it is quite a delight, and you think, oh wow, what a great run of television I've consumed. And other times you're like, I can't deal with this person.
Back in the day when it first started, Corrie was just 2 episodes a week. It was as Neighbours kind of grown over the years as well.
As far as I'm aware, it's always had that same classic half-hour block.
Okay.
It moved networks about 5 years ago, which was the death knell. A lot of us realized that it was not a great move. It moved to the digital channel rather than the mainstream network. And it became the flagship show for the digital channel, but no one was watching. And it's become sandwiched between episodes of Friends and The Big Bang Theory. And it was just, so we were grateful that it lasted through all of that. And it just kept getting that injection of UK, European funding, but there was just not enough local love for it to stay. So by the time it was in dire straits, there was nothing anyone locally could do because it wasn't successful enough in Australia for a network to get behind it. What could have saved it is if a government body had stepped in, like a Screen Australia or Film Victoria could have offered up traineeships, or there could have been some initiative. But we're all just, we couldn't save it.
No, it's us Brits' fault, isn't it, for pulling the funding at the end of the day? I apologise on behalf of my country.
No, Channel 10 should never have moved it to a channel called Peach. It was called Channel 11, and then they rebranded, and the channel became Channel Peach. And we were just scratching our heads going, no.
Not surprised. But I mean, what I did hear, though, from other fans that had watched it, because Gemma and I just watched the last week of Neighbours, but what I'd heard from other people who had been watching it was that you got a really good last few months, and people were saying this is the best Neighbours has been for years. Did you agree with that?
Yeah, that sentence gets a lot of a workout. Whenever things seem like they're on shaky ground, that sentence gets rolled out. But you could tell on screen there was a shift once the performers knew that the show was over, because there was this extra intensity to all of the emotions. So when I was talking before about a character death, everyone was just turning it on. The waterworks, it was gut-wrenching. And even just someone moving interstate, like Roxy and Kyle moving to Darwin, was suddenly the most emotional farewell party I've ever seen on Ramsay Street. So we got these extra layers of emotion built in, which was great. And also it didn't stop them from doing stunts and location episodes. And it was great that we didn't get a stripped back version of the show. They just kept throwing the stunts and action-packed episodes at us.
Did you find that they had enough time to tie up the stories in a satisfactory way, or were there any ones that were kind of rushed or dropped?
Yeah, I was worried that they wouldn't. They did rush a lot of the pathway towards all the households wanting to sell up and put their houses on the market. That, again, because I was watching 90 Minutes a Night, maybe that was very well paced, but it's all a blur. There were a couple of the newer characters that we didn't really get. We didn't get a sense of what their futures would be. So we didn't know, it was nice. It would be nice to know if Mackenzie would maybe secure a job as a lawyer down the track, or what if Freya said she was going to be a paramedic, but we just didn't get a sense that some of the characters were going to go on to their big, amazing, happy endings. And it was sort of like every character had as long as they had a romantic end, that seemed to be enough. Like, okay, this couple got together, assume everything's fine after this. And I was kind of hoping that more of them would sell and move, because I think I think the Kennedys deserve a year or two in Queensland, get some sun, put a few things behind them. But I think they put so much content in and wrapped up a lot of stuff that I didn't think was possible.
Were you happy with the way that they brought the characters back, that they didn't overshadow the main, the long-term characters? It wasn't just like, hey, there's a new character. Well, what about
I think they did it brilliantly. I think they used the device of the memory book, the History of Ramsay Street book, Harold's book, as an excellent key to unlock the reason for a lot of characters to be making cameos, and tying it into a Facebook group, which is perfect. Of course, there would be a Facebook group. And also there was a wedding. So there was a multi-generational wedding. So Toadie and Melanie had a May December romance going on. So there was a reason for friends from previous seasons of the show to come back, and it made sense.
It really did. We noticed that as we were watching it, because one thing that we used to enjoy on the old episodes of Coronation Street, like the old ones that we've seen from the 60s, is that at weddings they'd all have like telegrams from old characters, and it felt a little bit like this, and it felt very, very natural to have all these appearances from residents of Ramsay Street.
And
I love that.
I love wedding episodes where they at least refer to where people are, or even if you assume that someone's in the next room, you don't have to see everyone on camera, but if they at least say, and then we're going to go see mum and dad at the reception afterwards in Colac or whatever it is. But it was great to have a reason to actually see faces and have a big
I don't know whether Neighbours does this, but one thing we sometimes make fun of Corrie for is that when there's a wedding happening, a character will always ring up and say, "Oh yeah, I can't make it because," or because they can't get the actor back. They always have to come up with these excuses. Oh, so and so's broken their arm, or
or in the case of Jane, Annie Jones saying, "I'm not going because I'm too heartbroken." Because clearly she was being used in the other block with Guy Pearce. So they could. She's like, I don't have time to come to the wedding on the same day. Sometimes it is a little bit, of a left turn. You think, oh, okay. And like Toadie's brother wasn't at his wedding. That was strange. Well, neither of his brothers, Stoney or Puffy. So, they've never needed to have as many weddings as they've needed to have. I was actually as an extra, I was at the almost wedding of Carl and Izzy back in the day.
Yeah.
I used to do a bit of extras work on Neighbours, and I was in the waterhole after they called off the wedding and decided they were just going to stay as they were. And then everyone had a big party and ate cake in the waterhole. Or back then it was Lou's Place, the pub. And then that was the night the pub burnt down. And so they had to the part of the story was they were evacuating everyone from the pub. So that was a fun night to be part of. But I love that there would be almost weddings. Like, that's an expensive event to suddenly pull the pin on.
I know. So tell me about your experience of watching the final episode last week then. Where were you? On your own? Were you with friends? Was it a big viewing party?
So I had initially wanted to host some sort of event back when they announced the final episode as airing on the 1st of August. Then they changed the date, and the wind left my sails at that point. I thought, I don't have the energy to, what if they change it again? Yeah. Also, it's tricky because a lot of my podcast audience is in the UK, because that's where the bigger Neighbours audience is. So I don't have a huge local audience. I have a few loyal listeners, but so I didn't know what to do. Then I moved house, so I couldn't organize anything. But at the 11th hour, my co-host Kate and I, CJ was unwell, so she couldn't come, but Kate and I went to a public screening in Federation Square in Melbourne CBD. They've got a big outdoor screen, and they had deck chairs set up. And I thought, this is going to be miserable because it's middle of Melbourne winter, and which is not dissimilar to, despite Aaron's many lies, it's not dissimilar to a bleak London day, like an English day. Which region is Corrie in? I know nothing about Corrie.
It's north. It's the grey damp region. So the weather's not brilliant there.
That was the forecast for the Thursday that they were screening it here. And Kate said, we've got to go to Fed Square. And I said, it's going to be wet and cold and we're going to be sad. And I don't want to do that, but I didn't want to organize anything. So I said, right, we're going. And it turned out to be lovely. The weather held up, like the rain held off. They had blankets and we were all just buzzing, and it became like a theatre pantomime, like theatre restaurant sort of vibe. And we were yelling out. I was yelling out a lot of stuff to the screen, yelling at Paul and cheering for everybody, Susan, and I was yelling at Jane to Pash, Mike, and we were just being obnoxious. And then I was really tired that day. I'd been up very early. I had done an interview for our local national broadcaster, ABC, on TV in the very early hours to talk about the finale. And I was so tired. And then I just sobbed. I burst into tears at the very end. And of course, all the news cameras were pointed at us as we were both sobbing and hugging each other. And of course, that's the footage that rolled on all the news channels the next day. So, and I just laughed all of the next day. I'd been really sad, but we're just seeing ourselves. And even in the moment, and as I was crying and I could see the camera pointing at me, I said, oh no, I've become a meme. But so it was...
What does it mean for the podcast now? Is it like you called it a day? Is it done, or are you going back and looking at old episodes? Or
no, we're going to keep going. A couple of months ago we stopped recapping everything because it was just too much. So we've got a couple of months worth of episodes to just really dissect, put under the magnifying glass. But we also want to speak to a lot more alumni. We've had a few cast and a few writers on the show, but I want to try and get a few from the current cast to chat to us about what all of this process was like, putting the final episodes together. And we do have a cast member who has agreed to speak to us in a week. So I am really excited about that because she's one of our favorites. And ideally I want to get recapping all of the stuff we missed and speak to as many people as we can, and then maybe cherry pick some very key arcs and episode arcs and go through those. But we have no desire to go back to the beginning. My co-host Kate watched all of Prisoner from the beginning, and that took her, I think, 4 years. So, and she said, no, 80s television, I don't need to go back there. So, and there are other people that want to start up recap podcasts from the beginning. So I'm happy to leave that to them.
Yeah. Oh, it's still good to hear that there's going to be more to come for Neighbours, though. I'm sure your UK fans over here will be pleased to know that. I mean, just one last question from one soap podcaster to another. How would you say that doing a podcast has changed your life?
Oh,
just a little question.
This is where I got emotional last week because it's really the connection to the UK particularly has really moved me. Like the friendships we've formed and the online community we've got is really lovely. So, and I went over to England a few years back, and I did a little live podcast recording in London, and had in a pub, and had people turn up, and I'm still friends with all those people that were there, and it's just that community is unbelievable.
Yeah, and I felt the same thing doing my podcast. It's lovely, isn't it? Aren't people lovely?
And just having the same thoughts as people, or just you really want to drill down onto the minute details that other people have thought about too. And you think, oh, good, I'm not the only one that's trying to figure out how they got all this stuff done before 8 a.m. and wondering why they're not at their jobs.
Yeah, because I mean, as we all know, soap audiences have been declining. So in real life, there's not as many people to talk to. So it's just lovely to be able to have these podcast communities of fans that you can share that with.
Yeah, because soap standing alone is not necessarily the pinnacle of high art, so it needs this extra layer of commentary to it adds to the viewing experience. It's not meant to be watched and that's it. You have to ask questions.
But do you think you might pick up another soap now that Neighbours is gone?
Gosh,
an attempt to Corrie?
Well, I wouldn't even know where to find Corrie here. It's got to be on one of the, maybe it's on UK TV, on the pay TV network, but tell me, what is it in Corrie for me to go across? What's going to hook me in?
I think just having watched the last week of Neighbours, it's very similar. It's about families, relationships. There's great comedy in Coronation Street. And what was interesting for me is being able to watch a soap that was set in another country and kind of picking out bits of their culture and saying, oh, that's a bit like us, or that's a bit different to us. And I think you might find it interesting to see what northern UK life is like.
And are they all on the one street, like Ramsay Street?
Yeah, pretty much. There's over the years, because I mean, I was the show's been going for over 60 years now, and it started off as an interior cardboard set, basically, and it has expanded over the years. So there's a couple of extra roads coming off it now, but there's a lot more houses in Corrie than there are on Ramsay Street. There's a lot. The main cast is a lot bigger. There's about like 80 people, 80 regulars on the cast at the moment.
Wow.
So
that's intriguing in itself.
Yeah, so there's an awful lot to take in, I guess, if you're a new viewer to it. But I know of an excellent Coronation Street podcast that can fill you in on the background details.
Well, I could also just listen to you guys, and and if I get up to speed and feel familiar enough, then I can jump in.
Well, you could. Also, that'd be a very good idea.
I'll look out for some Aussies too. You mentioned Rebecca Ritters. She's now a German journalist. Well, she's a journalist in Germany.
Oh yeah, so she was in Coronation Street for just a couple of episodes a few decades ago. So that's interesting. And we sent over Ryan Thomas to you, he played Raphael a couple of years ago.
Yes,
he was in Coronation Street for a bit.
Yeah, every now and then someone would appear, and we were all scratching our heads, but half of the audience would be like, "Oh, okay, that guy. All right, what's he doing? What's he up to?"
Well, listen, Vaya, it's been absolutely lovely chatting to you this morning. This morning for me. What time? What time is it for you? Your evening?
Nearly 9 p.m.
Nearly 9 p.m. Nearly noon for me. Well, thank you for coming.
I'm about to edit our. Well, it's halfway edited, but I'm gonna listen to our recap of the finale. We recorded for 2 hours, which we've never done. Like we would usually cap it at an hour, but it's a big one.
It's a lot of work being a podcaster, isn't it? I think not everybody appreciates how much goes into it, but I definitely do. So I will leave you to that and say thank you again very much for coming onto the podcast.
No worries.
And if you do end up getting into Coronation Street, do get in touch.
Definitely, 100%. We'll do.
Right, goodbye then.
See ya.
Bye. Oh, wasn't that lovely?
So there you go.
Thank you very much, Vaya, for coming on the podcast.
That's cool.
That's really, really cool to be able to speak to somebody, a fellow podcaster. So someone that we can bond with. I'd love to know if she ends up giving Coronation Street a try. Whether we can convert her.
Yeah, why not? One by one. It just takes a 20-minute interview for each person.
Yeah, to convert every single Australian to Coronation Street. Well, anyway, that is the end of this week's bonus podcast, everybody. I hope you enjoyed listening to that. Well, thank you if you stayed on to the end, even though we haven't talked about Coronation Street on this episode for a good hour or so, but I don't know. But, it was a special week, a sad week for soaps. It's always sad to lose one of our fellow soaps, but hopefully that's going to be the last for a while, and Corrie keeps on going as well.
Of course. And also, I'd like to shout out to our Neighbours loving Conversation Street listeners.
Yes, we do have
John.
We do have many.
There's quite a few. John did try very heroically to help us understand what was going on.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
But sadly, my brain...
Yeah, Rebecca's also into Neighbours. She says that she listens to the Neighbours podcast.
Yeah, that's
as well,
right.
So
yeah, there's quite a few people who hopefully are still listening. So we're sorry for your loss.
Yeah, indeed. Right, that is it then for this week's episode. We'll be back at the weekend for our summing up of what's been going on in Coronation Street this week. But until then, goodbye from me. Goodbye from Gemma.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. See you.